Okay.
Okay.
Susan, we can start when you're ready.
Do you want to give it another few minutes, or do you want to start?
I'm good.
You're good?
We can start. If you are ready to start, we can start now.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right, Isabel. I'll let you guys unmute.
Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for this Bravo leadership conversation. We hope everyone is well and is staying healthy. We're very happy to see all of these familiar faces virtually for this year's version of the Council of the Americas Symposium and Bravo series. For the past few months, we've been hosting dialogues with great leaders that are shaping Latin America's reality during such critical times. Before we introduce today's program and amazing guests, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Bank of America, the AES Corporation, MasterCard, SAP, Softtech, Chubb, Latin America, HSBC Securities, INC, and Microsoft, our partners at the Inter-American Development Bank, and our media partners, America's Quarterly, CNN en Español, and the Financial Times. Today, we and great believers in inclusion and equality, both in the public and private sectors. It is my pleasure to introduce Isabel de Sant Malo, Senior Advisor to the Administrator of the UNDP and former Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs in Panama, and Patricia Menéndez-Cambó, Deputy General Counsel at SoftBank Group International. Welcome both. You're both my dear friends, and we were honored to give you the Bravo Business Awards 2 years ago in recognition of your leadership and important contributions empowering women in society in the workplace. We are so happy again to bring them together for this important conversation. And what a different world we're living in today. I wish we could all be there in person, but unfortunately, here we are in the virtual world. Our audience will have an opportunity to ask questions to our speakers towards the end of the program. And if you want to ask a question, please send it to Ariana Molina at amolina@as-coa.org. With that, Patty, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. I'm truly humbled to be here again with you and Isabel Santos Malo, the former Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs for Panama. It's truly an honor to have partnered and worked with you all these years on trying to combat gender equality in the region. And Isabel de Malo is an example of someone who's championing this. So my first question is to Isabel. Isabel, given the situation that we're facing now with COVID in the region that has really exacerbated many of the existing economic and social issues in Latin America, such as all the disparities and inequality, many people think that this may be an opportunity for the leaders in the region, both public and private and multi-sector, to build back better societies. What do you think you advise to give those people in the region today?
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here with you, Patty. Again, great to be here with you, Susan, and congratulations for reaching out even through these times and keeping it alive to discussions of these important issues. And Patty, you've pointed out to a critical question, the critical question that we continue to discuss globally. I think Latin America has a particularly difficult situation because we had weaknesses already installed before the pandemic hit. We had a crisis, we had tension. We had seen in 2019 around the region in places, Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, protests, mass protests, citizens not being responded to by their governments, by their states. So we have now the pandemic, which sits on top of that. I think COVID-19 needs to show to us that we were not ready to receive this pandemic. The way we've responded in terms of health in our schools, which have had a difficult time going back to teaching without the technological support, governments having a difficult time with cash transfers because the infrastructure, the data was not in place. That has shown us that we need to transform the region. We need to make the reforms that we've been discussing for the longest time. And I am hopeful that the crisis can be a turning point and can show Latin America that we need to discuss the future we want and how can we build it together. And we need to discuss a new social compact for the region where we agree on the major reforms that need to be made. It's a calling that we've received, and I think we should pay attention to it. Leaders from the private sector, from the public sector, from the different sectors to come together, analyze the situation, and take it as an objective to transform the region. How about you, Patty, from the private sector? I am sure that sitting where you are and the private sector being hit with the economy, the situation of workers working away from main offices when they can. How do you see it from the business sector? Do you think this will represent a change for Latin American businesses in the way not only they do business, but in the way they contribute to society?
Well, I think it's an opportunity to take a look at the institutions and see how we can build smarter and more effective institutions in the region. One of the things that we believe very strongly is in the advancement of technology and the ability of technology to bring to the economy hundreds of millions of people in the region that are not connected today with all of societies. There's so many benefits from the perspective of education, from the ability to work remotely. And so it's really an opportunity to take a look at society as a whole and to see how, with technological advances, we can use that as a benefit for society. One of the questions that I had for you, Isabel, was according to the recent survey of the World Economic Forum, there's 140 million Latin Americans that are considered to be informal workers. This represents 55% of the working age population. How could countries respond to this challenge of informality?
I think that has been one of the hardest things for Latin America because when you have lockdowns, those that have a formal employment will find some ways with their employers of how to continue on working. But those that are informal, that need to get out of their house to ensure that they continue being productive, have just been unable to do so. For a region like ours, to have half of the population, a little over half of population in the age of being productive, not being able to perform is dramatic. That's a lot of people. So I think that we need to continue to work towards formality. And in Latin America, there are obstacles to this. There are obstacles in terms of legislation. Sometimes legislation is too cumbersome, it's complicated, and it doesn't give any incentives for companies to formalize workers. We need to work on legislation so that for the private sector, it makes sense to formalize workers. We also need to work on productivity. We also need to work on training, providing different types of incentives. If we do not pay attention to informality, I think that will continue to be an obstacle, not only in the face of COVID-19, but in general because of business in general, because of the economy. We will have it as an obstacle to growth. So many informal workers, and I am sure that that's become also a point of concern during this COVID-19.
So one of the challenges that you see and you feel every day is how women are disproportionately affected by the economic fallout by COVID. What do you think are the root of these causes, and what is the opportunity to address this in the future?
Just like we had tensions and situations in place before COVID-19, the issue with women, as we are aware, I mean, you've worked so much on this, and the council and Susan have been important leaders on this. And we know that limitations were already in place. And the situation is that as COVID-19 shows tensions that were present, women's lack of advancement is also one of those. So where have the new family responsibilities fallen due to the pandemic? Children are doing homeschool. Who's taking care of children doing this homeschool? Mothers that before were going away for their work now are performing their work at home at the same time that they're having to supervise their young children with school while they're having to care for their families. So that issue, and I am sure that we've advanced and that we have more sharing of responsibilities today than we had before. And that's something that we should applaud, but we need to do more of that. Also, the issue of finances. We already knew before the pandemic that it was a lot harder for women-led businesses to mobilize resources because of lack of training capacity many times, doing the work that you need to do in order to get finances, or because they don't have a credit record, because they've been at home for a number of years raising their children, for any number of issues. So while businesses need to go out and get fresh resources to respond and adapt, to launch websites, to go virtual, these resources, which all businesses are having a hard time getting to, women will face a hard time as well, more than men, because it's usually the way it happens. So in that regard, also we should pay attention, because not only will there be inequity there, but we will lose opportunities for good credit. Financial institutions will lose the opportunity of good credit because it's been proven as well that women are reliable in that regard. You are, Patty, very, very active in technology and finances, and I am sure you have seen from your own side the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women. What does this look like from the lens of the private sector, particularly, as I mentioned, the double burden that professional women face? What has your experience been?
So I think with respect to the region, we'd like to see an increase of women studying STEM, an increase of women studying AI. SoftBank has had the opportunity to partner in the region with a program that is focused on teaching AI to future entrepreneurs, future programmers in the region. And so it would be nice to see, more women involved in those programs. And frankly, to see more women entrepreneurs. And I'm sure they're out there. The question is how to connect them, how to get access to the ideas that they have and to the different things. So for those things, SoftBank is very much forward to seeing more women entrepreneurs.
And can I ask you another question, Patty, in that same regard? What do you think corporations could do in addition to what you've already mentioned to respond to these challenges? Can we? Is it possible, for example, to think of public policy that promotes businesses to encourage women to stay at home after the COVID passes, or to give support for childcare? What can corporations do to support women on things like this?
I think corporations have a role to play. I think supporting women who are multitasking, both homeschooling and work, there are a number of things that can be done. Flexibility on hours, support for equipment, make sure they have the right tools at home, that they have the right ability, that they have access to be able to continue working on during the COVID. And flexibility. I mean, I think flexibility is the most important thing. But at the same time, I view it as an opportunity. One of the things about women and women mothers that work is they're extremely resilient. So, in the face of COVID, in the face of crisis, it's an opportunity for women to show that, notwithstanding that they're not in the office, that they're present and that they're, continuing to work in an environment that's conducive to doing well.
Maybe it will even open up new opportunities for them after the pandemic is gone. Let's hope for that. Let's push for that, because I think many enterprises have also seen that it is possible to work from home. It is possible. You can make it happen. So perhaps that will be some of the positive things. It's positive learnings that we can have after the COVID-19 is gone.
100%. I mean, I think it should be able to put women with the most talent of an equal par with anybody without having to think about geography or location. One of the challenges for working women, especially if they're a two-income household, is they don't necessarily have the same flexibility to move. Traditionally, women move to follow their partner's job, not necessarily theirs, and they don't uproot the children and move schools. So I'm hopeful that epidemic, one of the good things is that realize the talented women are out there, and they don't necessarily need to be in a physical office location to provide a positive contribution, and opening it up for the possibility of women to work, would like to work, but don't have the ability to move.
Wouldn't that be great? I agree. I'm hopeful as well.
So one of the things that you're hard pressed not to look at is one of the things that COVID-19 exacerbated is just the general governance crisis in the region that was already wrong. And so what advice do you have for the private sector as far as pushing policy, or for the current multilaterals and public leaders, to balance the safety and soundness, but at the same time maintain and respect governance?
I think that's a great question. UNDP is calling COVID-19 a governance crisis as well. As soon as the pandemic hit, we knew it was a health crisis, and immediately we knew it was an economic and a social crisis as well. What we know now is that it's also a governance crisis. As I mentioned earlier, the weaknesses present in our institutions have come afloat in a stronger fashion through the response. So we need to understand that these reforms need to happen. What can the private sector do? What can governments and multilateral institutions do. I think that a new agreement, a new social contract needs to happen. And, that can sound very, very general, but in a region like ours, where privilege has been at the center, at the core of decision making, how often have we heard in a region like ours? I mean, all over, but more in Latin America than in other regions, I would say, that decisions to protect a given economic sector are the result of pressures to the government. Or why does Latin America has 11% tax system while OECD have almost 30? Why does Latin America have such a small tax system, has so little resources coming from taxes? Well, perhaps it's also the result of the pressures and of the governance crisis that has not allowed or made it possible for public policy to take decisions that are hard. So while we understand that there are things that need to change and that there are sacrifices that need to be made, who will make those sacrifices? How do we ensure that those sacrifices are equally distributed? How do we make sure that resources to respond to the crisis, to be geared towards the private sector, do not go mostly to large enterprises that have the capacity to influence government decisions, but that also go to medium and small-sized enterprises? That's what I mean when I refer to a new social contract. The agreements that a society needs to have in order to ensure that we take on some hard decisions, because we're all going to be better. If the government needs to build better schools and have a better education system and have better health systems, that costs money. Where is that money going to come from? Also, our bureaucracies are weak, but we know that political parties have a strong pressure of placing people in positions. Those are pressures that are there. And those are pressures that we need to deal with as a society and change so that we move forward. So I think as a governance crisis, something that needs to be put on the table is we need a reform, we need to agree on a reform, and we need to make sure that we all give our fair share.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'd be remiss if I didn't quote Peter Ginsburg this week, who said, "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made." So how do we ensure, I mean, you've already achieved the position of Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs. How do we achieve and prepare additional women leaders to have a seat at the table in that contract, in that reform?
Well, when I was in government, I pushed for legislation to ensure at least 30% participation of women on boards. And it was passed. I mean, I tried 50%. I did not get 50%, but I got 30, which is something. So now in Panama, for government boards and also industries that are regulated, so banking, insurance, trading, all sectors of the economy that are regulated, you need to ensure that boards have at least 30% of women on their boards. I was not a believer on quotas before. I am a firm believer on quotas now. And when I hear the argument that we were discussing over lunch with my husband and children today about the late Justice Bader Ginsburg, because we all feel the loss so much, and we were talking about is the United States going to have a new justice, and if so, who is it going to be? And I was arguing about more minorities, being represented. And my oldest son say, why? You need to ensure that the best for the job gets the job. And I said, yes, but if you don't look for the best at the job on minority groups, you will just you will overlook it. So I'm not saying name somebody that does not have the competencies. I am saying look at minorities as well, so that you find those with the competencies. And that happens with minorities, and that happens with women all the time. There was a huge backlash in Panama when I promoted that legislation, and the private sector started saying, where are these women going to come from? There are not enough women. You know the story. Patty, you know the story well. It's the same everywhere. But at the end, they're there. And actually, the National Bank of Panama, for the first time in 100 years after this legislation was passed, not only has women on the board, but a woman, it's the president of the board now. So I do believe that change needs to be pushed from different angles. And I think that the private sector has a huge role to play in this. When you look at promotions within your own company, and when you, still, we cannot ignore that people think, well, but maybe she'll get pregnant. Maybe she'll have to, she'll work less because she has children. We need to get those biases out of our minds, because having a more equitable leadership, including women, will provide for better societies for all of us. So I think there's a lot of work to do there. And I'm glad we have women from the private sector leading in this regard, like yourself and Susan, and many more.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I do think that the private sector has a role to play in that. But I was not in favor of quotas until about 10 years ago. And I think after all the years of working on this, unfortunately, without pressure from public policy, I think it will take too long. I think eventually it will get there. But all of the missed opportunities, all of the missed discussion, and the variety of opinions, companies will miss out on that. And so I do think that public policy has to play an important role in that, because otherwise you have all these arguments about the pipeline and women, and if it was objective for you to have it, you'd maintain a pipeline. And so
yes,
nobody ever thinks now with a point of the Supreme Court, they're like, why does it have to be a woman? Why does it have to? Nobody ever says why were there 9 men? Like, if there were 9 women, would that be a bad thing? So it's not about like making roads, it's about equality and having the opportunity. And I think we need leaders like you that are setting standard out there, because I think without public policy, I think it'll happen, but 40 years from now, 50 years.
I agree with you. Public policy is central, as is the leadership in the private sector. So let me ask you a question in that regard, Patty, because we've seen changes within the private sector with companies committing to more diversity, companies committing to more inclusion. But now when companies are really having a hard time to stay afloat, how can we ensure that this situation does not take away from the commitments they had already made to support diversity and inclusion?
I think that's a very good question. And I think for a company that committed to diversity, it would be a huge step back not to give up on it. Most of the companies, when they commit to diversity, they put programs together, they do training, they do very focused recruiting, they focus on having a slate of candidates for a position that's diverse from the very beginning. And that's really where it starts. When you're looking for a position, if you don't have a diverse set of candidates, you didn't look hard enough, because there's women that graduate from college that graduate from MBA, that graduate from law school, that graduated from university. You really need to look a little bit bigger. And so making sure that you build the right networks to feed the pipeline, to fill the positions is a commitment from the company. So I think companies would be hard pressed to kind of give up on them now. And one of the nice things about Zoom is every time you get on a Zoom, if you don't have a woman on the Zoom, it's noticeable. So, sometimes you think like, oh, there isn't a woman in the room, but you don't really look around the room to see. But in a Zoom, you see everybody. So you're in the private sector and you're doing a Zoom and there isn't a woman. Why?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I do hope that positive contribution stays with us as well. But in that same regard, let me also ask you, Patty, because we've seen some success stories in Latin America with entrepreneurship, particularly contributing significantly to the region's economic development and now to the recovery. Now that we see all of this concentration on digital and companies rushing to have their web pages up and to have digital access. So success stories that we've seen, such as Rappi, Nubank, dLocal, which are impressive, but are also many of them led by men. How do we give women in Latin America more access to the opportunities to be part of that booming entrepreneurial ecosystem?
So I think part of it is focusing on it. Again, creating the network, focusing on bringing attention to the women entrepreneurs. People talk about Nubank as being led by a man, but it was co-founded by a woman. And so it's about concentrating on it, making sure that there's policy to support women entrepreneurs, that they're, from a private sector perspective and university perspective, there's tons of opportunities to joint venture and to make sure that you're focusing on entrepreneurship on a co-ed basis, not just for men. But it's something that you have to make a commitment to.
I agree with you, and that's why I celebrate organizations like the council that continues to push for this and open it up. And I am sure that as more enterprises are leading with example, we will see more and more join in that commitment. And I couldn't agree with you more. This is a commitment that we need to see as a first step.
One of the things that you were talking about earlier that I want to circle back to is the issue of financial literacy for women. So given that there's a tremendous amount of education online and that you're trying to, is there a way to use technology and education to increase financial literacy for women in the region?
I think 100%. And I do hope that that's one of the priorities that we take on after this experience. But we will encounter limitations that need to be addressed, just like we've encountered limitations with education. In Panama, for example, to speak of my own country, the school year goes from March to December. When the pandemic hit Panama, my youngest son, who's a senior in high school, had done 1 week in school in March. So he did 1 week and then school was closed. So he's been homeschooled ever since that happened. He goes to a private school and it took them 1 week to rapidly switch to online, and the school was able to do it very, very well. It took the public sector until about 3 weeks ago. It took them 5 months to say that officially the school year would continue for the public sector through digital platforms. They had to go and build the platforms. They had to ensure that kids had the tools. They had to ensure that the homes had the broadband internet. So now you do have the offer, but still you don't have a large percentage of students being able to take advantage of that because they don't have the support. I mean, in our home, I've had to upgrade the band of the internet twice already since the pandemic started. And then, you make a phone call and you do it, but that's not available to everybody and everywhere. There are some remote places that do not have it. And some kids are studying from a cell phone because that's a tool that they have. So talking about financial literacy for women, I think that digital platforms are super powerful, and I do hope that in the future we will be able to use more of that. But then we also need to solve the issue of how do they access it, because not everybody has the same access to the instruments and to the internet. And maybe that is something that we could prioritize as well. I was having a discussion a couple of days ago with somebody from Goldman Sachs, and they have, I learned, I didn't know, a very powerful free training on Coursera for female leaders that want to, it's models on private sector, not private sector, but entrepreneurship training. So the offer is there and the need is there. So we need to work on the in-between. I mean, the offer is there not only from Goldman Sachs, the offer is there from many, many places. So we need to work on the in-between. Do these women have the access? Do they have the tools? Do they have the internet literacy to do it? Do they have the time? And I am sure that if we prioritize that, we can work on financial literacy for women, and maybe that can be a very powerful jump forward as we discuss how to involve women in the private sector.
See, because one of the hardest part is building the platform. And I agree with you. I think with public policy work, with private partnership to increase connectivity, once you have the platform built, you can use it for all levels of schooling. It really does give women an advantage to take a night course online. It really does give women not only the ability to do both, teach their children, but also to kind of go next step and get a graduate degree, or to do something that becomes more difficult. For certain women, at the time that you had children, you have school-age children. And so one would be hopeful that after COVID crisis that has shown not only in Latin America, also in the U.S., the lack of preparedness, for a transition, for online education, that once you do it, that you don't take it back, that you grow on it. I mean, there's no question that people want to return to classrooms and they want to return back to the universities and they want to return back to the office, but one should not be the yin of the yang of the other. You should be able to have both, and by maintaining both, you can increase the inclusiveness for those that are limited to having a physical location.
Totally. I remember when I was younger and my children were very young, and I worked for UNDP Panama at the time. And at some point, it was just too much. I felt that I needed to change that because it was just taking too much time away. And the office gave me the opportunity of working 2 afternoons a week from home. And that was the world to me. I was able to stay 5 years more because that was the world. 2 afternoons where I would, organize myself. And when you try it, businesses find that it works, but there is usually this reticence because you want to ensure that you're getting your money's worth, and you're concerned that employees are not going to work as hard, while at the end, when people are happier because their personal life is working, they tend to work more, but their personal life needs to work. You cannot have peace of mind if you know that your children are not being taken care of, or that you're going to be away for 12 hours a day because you take the 8 hours and then you have all these extra hours of transportation. So there, I agree with you. I hope that we can stay with both and understand that it's not one thing or the other.
And it's an opportunity to bring education, and financial literacy and access for women to work that are outside the major cities. I mean, here in the U.S., you've seen a number of companies announce that people can work virtually, permanently, certainly half the time. That flexibility will give women some peace of mind and ability to have better cultural experience at work, because they were already doing it, working, but this will make the experience better. And it will also give women the ability to take on jobs that maybe are out of the city where they live.
Totally. Wouldn't that be fantastic?
And compete in a fair level.
I agree. I think there are many opportunities in the horizon that it's going to take a while until we define, what's going to happen next. But I do hope that Latin America understands that there are things that are positive that we can take from this, and green economy and virtual, digital, and work on those.
So when you think about the ahead region, for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, how do we keep people on course for this? Because there is an opportunity for the region. There is an opportunity for the region it's seen in its darkest moments right now, where people have come to rise and work from virtual scenarios and, are working together to face the challenges of the pandemic. How do you keep that going forward to create a positive, sustainable, egalitarian, gender equality economy?
About 5 weeks ago, the multidimensional poverty report, the global report, was launched. And something very powerful was shown in that report. It so happens that Sierra Leone was one of the countries that was able to really drop their multidimensional poverty indexes, and they did it through the Ebola crisis. So that's a powerful example that, yes, it is possible through a crisis to come out stronger and advance in terms of development. Yes, we are facing many, many obstacles, but there are also going to be fresh resources available. We know that countries are getting more in debt. We know that financial institutions are being flexible in putting money forward because there will be need for liquidity and resources to face the crisis. How we spend those resources will be detrimental to, do we go back or do we go forward? For example, many cities have been investing in cycling routes because people would rather get on their bike than get on the public transportation where you're more exposed to the virus. Well, that's green. That's a positive step, and that requires infrastructure. That requires public works. But those are public works different from enlarging your roads for more cars. So if we think hard on every decision being made in this regard, where are we going to put all of those fresh resources? If we're investing in schools, are we going to prioritize digital? Are we going to prioritize broadband internet for everybody? Are we going to prioritize green energy? So those decisions, I think, will be detrimental on defining if a country is on board or not for Agenda 2030. And it's a good time right now to pay attention to that, because it's going to be hard anyway. I mean, we are going through a difficult time anyway. And yes, we do need to make some decisions, but let's make sure that those decisions are forward-looking.
So can I interrupt this amazing conversation so that we can take some questions from the floor? So do we have some questions? So we have one. Isabel, Latin American countries have elected several women into high-level political office. Do you believe that this has had a positive impact in the region, or has electing women allow for countries to feel that they no longer have to push the agenda for equality because they elected a woman to power? Great question.
Wow, that's a good question. As much as Latin America has advanced, and as much as we've had women elected to the presidency, there's not one single head of state that is a woman right now in Latin America. So in that regard, we've been better than we are right now. In terms of percentages within parliaments, it's super low. It's super low globally, but Latin America, it's very, very low. I don't think that it's been like, check, we've done it and we're not going to push more. I think countries and societies are aware of the lack of advance there. But I think we need to work harder and find those obstacles that are not visible. For example, many countries, including my own, have requisites for women candidates for elections. But then, as long as those women are on the list, that's enough. And then they don't get the financial resources. They don't get the support of the political party. And we need to understand that women are half of the population. So if we include women on the decision-making processes, we will make decisions that are better, that are more inclusive. So we have a long way to go, but I don't think that we've said check, Susan. I just think that is a really hard objective, and we need to work harder at that.
And let me just follow up on that question about legislators. There aren't many women legislators in Latin America. Fix that. Politics is harsh for everybody, but I think women are more adverse to risk, and in general, we are more adverse to public exposure because we're naturally concerned about our families. We're naturally concerned about our children. So, I've said before that I had the impression, and I was in politics exactly a little over 5 years. The 6 months that I ran for office and then while in office, I haven't had a political career for many years. So one of the things that really shocked me of entering politics is that I got the feeling that once you enter politics, you're giving everybody permission to make up things about you. It doesn't matter if you're true or not, where they got the information from. It's like civility is lost when you enter politics, and like civility that we all understand needs to be present and it's valuable. It's not necessarily when you're dealing with politics. That, I think women are more averse to that than men because of our nature. So I think we need to understand that, and we cannot just crucify everybody because the result is going to be less people in general, men and women, because there's too much at risk when you enter politics. That's for sure. So, Patty, I have a question. There's a question for you. COVID-19 has been particularly tough for companies that were in the process of establishing presence in various Latin American countries because they closed offices that provide legally required notarization or non-resident IDs needed for conducting business. Do you see a trend towards governments digitalizing or doing away with some of the cumbersome legal requirements for multinational corporations to conduct business locally?
I would hope so. I mean, I think, again, you need to look at that as an opportunity. Once you build the digital platform, think of all the efficiency that you would create in the system. Think how easier you would make it for foreigners to do business in your country, to create jobs, to operate on a daily basis. And, you know, we bring a lot more transparency to the system and a lot less bureaucracy. You know, the elimination of bureaucracy does not mean you're losing a job. you're just losing that job to technology. You can create a better job.
So I have a question for both of you, which has just come in. As we create the new normal, I guess we're on the new normal, how can we take advantage of the fact that men are also changing? The younger generation is more open to women's participation, and COVID has clearly shown women's leadership. So, both of you, what's the new normal? And how do we take advantage of the situation today? Patty, you want to start with you?
So one of the nice and hopeful things to see is that definitely the younger generation doesn't view gender equality the same way as, previous generation. Sometimes when I was watching Isabel discuss the thought process and I've seen it where people go through when they're bringing a woman, are they going to have a baby? Are they going to work less? Do they really need their job? And those were, to me, those are like 1980 ways of thinking of bringing women, like 1980, not today. And so I would hope that as that generation grows, that it keeps that commitment that you see to diversity and equality across the board.
Thank you. It's an interesting question. What?
Yes, I agree with Patty. I'm actually positive about younger generations, and I'm very happy to hear you say, Patty, that that's 1980, because I do hope that's 1980. I'm not so sure that it's 1980 everywhere, because I still hear it. I mean, those things that are 1980, we still hear them, and it's unacceptable. But I do see younger generations with a different approach, and younger generations even having a difficult time comprehending where we're coming from, because they don't have that approach. So I'm positive in that regard about the future. Having said that, it's taken too long. We need to speed it up. It's taking too long when you see the numbers of women on boards, of women at the heads of government, at the heads of enterprises. It's just very, very slow. And I was sitting in a panel in Davos once when I heard Christine Lagarde say that according to the IMF, it would take 200 years. It doesn't matter if it's 200 or 50. None of us are going to be around anyway. So it's just too much. We need to make sure that our daughters have a different situation and not be content with the fact that we've had a different situation from our mothers and that's good enough. No, we need to continue working towards equality of opportunities.
So I want to say one thing, Susan. Couldn't agree with Isabel more. When I say 1980s, I mean, those are people that are stuck in the 1980s. That was like permissible behavior back then. It's shameful, and I've heard it as well in the recent past, and it's shameful that they're stuck in that generation. And it's interesting what you say, because I've heard Christine Lagarde say at the World Economic Forum, but I heard her say it a couple of years ago, and she said it was going to take 100 years. So if you heard it recently, she's somewhat soured on our progress in the last 2 years.
So I have a question. This is my question now. So around the world, including in the United States, Patty, you and I just had a long conversation about this yesterday. There is a total lack of faith in institutions that we have all traditionally respected. And do you believe that if we had more women in leadership positions, that in fact the tendency would be to bring society together as opposed to further and to bring more trust in institutions than where we are today?
If I can jump at that first, I think that balance is always positive. I think that balance always contributes, and balance in leadership contributes. And I always put forward the example of a family. You need, for certain decisions, perspectives of both parents. It's important. Of course, a mother will see one angle and the father will see another angle, and they're both relevant and they're both important. And aren't many times women more in their family situations, those that are trying to bring together and to break disruption and to bring harmony? I think it's pretty natural to women. So yes, I would think that if we work towards equality, which is positive in many ways, perhaps we can also see a contribution there, which contributes to trust because of what women bring, and because balance is more natural to society in general.
Patty, anything?
I 100% agree. I think we should try it since we haven't. And I think that when we have women leaders, we should support them to encourage others to follow in their footsteps. Too many times, the criticism of female leaders tends to be a lot more personal than it is for a man. Like she's being motherly, or she's being bossy, and the adjectives that are used are not the adjectives that you use to describe men leaders. So, I'm a big believer of we have not had equality in government. We have not had equality in leadership positions. We might want to try it. We might want to try it because
I love that.
Democracy is kind of, being tested all over the world as we speak. And the other thing is, when I see people like Isabel, when I see people like you, Susan, going out there and building network, it's so important to continue that work. It is so important to continue bringing more women to the cause, to build more networks, and to really fill that void that exists for many young women who want to participate, who have a skill set and don't know where to start, or which is the right network. So I think it's very important to focus on that. And, and I think, sometimes we should look at it as the power of 10. If each woman can bring 10 people along, we would have a lot more effect. I find that men, when challenge them on these things and you remind them, don't you have a daughter? Don't you have a wife that works? All of a sudden, they look at it from a different prism, because when they went to graduate school, nobody taught gender equality in the 80s or even in the 90s in graduate schools in the US. Hell, they didn't even teach us in many of these things. And so as society builds and forms the next generation, why can't equality for women be part of it?
So you both talked about quotas. Do you think we should be more aggressively pursuing quotas, both in the public and private sector?
I do. 100%.
Patty?
I'm converted.
You're converted.
I'm converted as well. I did not believe in quotas before. I was against quotas. I was, why I want to get where I want to go because of my merits, not because of a quota. We need to understand you will not get there if you don't have the merits, but the quota will make it possible for others to see you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I call them transitory quotas to get from to there.
I like it. Transitory quotas.
So before we close, I have one last question for both of you. You are both such amazing leaders, and you have both faced challenges in your careers, and you've faced challenges in the virtual world of COVID. Could you each leave the audience with a piece of advice on how to lead, or how you've led in this crisis? What's the one piece of advice that you can give? Is it
go first, Patty? Should I go first?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to say two things. The second one is maybe more complicated than the first, but the first is never stop believing in yourself and don't let anybody tell you what you can or cannot do. Discover it for yourself. The second one is beware of who you trust. Women are very, it's within our nature to trust people, and not everybody's trustworthy. And actually, I found the hard way about that while in office. So I think we need to pay attention to that, because betrayal happens.
I completely agree with that. A lesson I learned very late in my career.
I couldn't agree with both of you more. And I think the trust thing is a very important thing, because, and I too have learned that lesson. I think you're so happy to be in the room. You're so happy to contribute. And you're not really thinking that once you got there, it's not personal. It's that trust factor doesn't exist. And so I think it's something that's very important, because it sets back women. I mean, the ABA did a study about 2 years ago here in the US about why there were so many successful women leaving the profession. And it turned out when they did the study that most of them were in their late 40s and early 50s. So statistically, it was after they had gone to law school, raised their children, been successful at law firm, and at some point they were disappointed in life. So I think the trust factor is something that we need to focus on.
I think that's right. I think women instinctively trust people, and they don't realize that people are not institutions. And institutions aren't trustworthy particularly. What?
Fully agree with that, yes.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, I want to thank Patty, I want to thank Isabel for this amazing conversation. You covered so much ground on so many topics, and it's so important to hear your perspectives. You've both been such successful leaders, both in the private sector and you, Isabel, also in the public sector. We look forward to continuing this dialogue, because if we don't make everyone aware of what needs to change, and people don't talk about it like you and Patty, then it won't happen. So I want to thank you both for spending a little over an hour with us today. I hope to see you both in person in the not too distant future. And for our audience, I want to thank you all for being with us today and enjoying this amazing conversation. And I hope that you will all stay very healthy and, of course, very happy in this new digital world. Thank you both.
Thank you, Susan, and congratulations on your leadership. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Isabel. Truly an honor.
My honor. Bye.